moving on, and I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you all can see that. Our next guest in a previous life was a kicker, which should tell you all you need to know about him. As strength and conditioning coaches, we have all had to train kickers at some point in the weight room during our careers. And with that experience, those kickers, man, they're a special breed. But Jason Robbins, he's the strength coach for the baseball program over at Arizona State, who recently, they garnered 5 players drafted in the first few rounds of this year, or the first 4 rounds of this year's draft. The shutdown this year of spring sports, it affected a lot of programs. But ASU baseball was one of those few programs with national championship potential. So, even as we're moving about fall sports and things of that nature, I was even just reminded, it's like, man, the spring sports got robbed of a lot of things. And we've always kept an eye on Jason, how he's doing. And I know that they're going to come back just as well next year. But before Arizona State, he was one of us here at Indiana. He served as our intern coordinator, mentoring 4 of our current full-time staff, as well as numerous major leaguers and Olympians, and originally hailing from Toledo, and now melting down there in the Arizona sun is our good friend, Jason Robbins. Jason, the floor is yours, my man.
Birch, thank you very much. What I want to know is, where on earth did you find that picture?
The internet always wins, Jason. The internet.
Seriously,
always wins.
I don't think I've ever seen that. Let me see here. Is it Sharon? Okay, good. All right. So for me, my topic when I was thinking about this, it really kind of started from talking with a lot of the interns. So much of our education nowadays in teaching our younger folks revolves around a lot of the X's and O's and a lot of the new things going on in our field, which is absolutely awesome and exciting. But sometimes and I consider myself a little bit of an old school guy, been in the field for a long time. I still think there's some benefits of the old ways of doing things. So that's really what kind of, led me down this, trying to find a balance between, the two. And when I think old school, I think, I still reminisce about the days that we were actually called strength and conditioning. Now we're sports performance, and I get that. It all makes sense. I'm not trying to hate on it, but there is something really sweet about the old school monikers where we're just focusing on moving some steel weight and sweating, and we're all about being simple and tough. Like I saw, a little bit of old school Rocky IV, I absolutely love that. Where new school, well, it has its methods. It's, now it's sports performance, athletic performance, facilities are absolutely everything. Sports science departments are growing up everywhere. We're teaching our kids more and more advanced methods, and data is absolutely everywhere. So for me, when I talk to some people and, you go to conferences and you talk about the old days, and, there's a reason for that. There's something that we kind of had right in the old days, but at the same time, there's definitely a reason that our field has evolved. And what I always try to preach to, to our interns and anybody that, I really want the best of both worlds. And, I'm not just talking about the Van Halen album, which is absolutely awesome, best of both worlds. But, for me, what I say, it's a very unpopular opinion that I think there's an over-reliance on science and technology at the cost of what I would kind of consider, old school coaching, because data can tell us a lot, but they oftentimes can't account for the human factor, of dealing with college age kids and college kids doing, college age stuff. Example I have of that is, sometimes, the wearable technology, Whoop and Oura rings and all that. We're trying to monitor these kids when they're, the 23 hours outside the weight room. But, I hear stories of all the time about how kids are kind of cheating that system. And, one that really stuck out where basically all the returners gave, did that cut out? All right, sorry, cut out on my end. And all the returners basically put all their wearables on all the freshmen and made the freshmen stay in while everybody else went out. And those stories are plentiful out there because kids are very creative and they'll find a way to do whatever they want to do. So sometimes when we're trying to utilize science, technology, sometimes kids are going to kind of outdo that. The other side of, all the data, which again, it's fantastic to have, all that has to be interpreted and then conveyed accurately to the athletes. One is if they actually care about it. Some of them don't, some of them do. But then I also say, where are you spending your time? Because it often takes a considerable amount of hours to mine through a lot of the raw data. And if that's something that you like to do, by all means, continue doing that. But something that I stress to, some of the younger people out there is, can you be spending that time a little bit more wisely? Again, still thinking about your team, maybe coming up with some individual protocols for certain kids that need, certain skills that they need to work on. Sometimes being a little bit more creative from a team and a culture aspect. So again, it's sometimes where are you spending your time and where can you provide the most bang for your buck with your time. So all things that I consider when I'm, looking at my program from a technology, from assessments, when I'm doing tests and what I'm doing from a programming perspective, is just because I can doesn't mean that I should. And the biggest thing I see nowadays is coaches love data. That we work with sport coaches, they absolutely love data. They want us to do data. They like numbers. But the thing that I always go back are they actually doing something with that data? And so many times that I see coaches want data, but they don't really change what they're doing. Sometimes strength coaches, we get data and we don't really change what we're doing. So that goes up to really my big point is it actionable? So when I'm doing some sort of assessment or technology, is it going to elicit an exact change? If I do some sort of intervention, it has to make me change what I do. So JD, when you were talking about with your program and how you assess every 2 weeks, I absolutely love that because to me, I consider that totally actionable. And at the end, I'll show you what we do. But if you're doing something and it doesn't elicit change immediately, it's probably not giving you the most bang for your buck. Another thing I look at is, can I get the same information in a different way? Oftentimes in an easier or many times a cheaper way. And in the current times, cheaper is going to be at a premium with the loss that the colleges are experiencing. An example of this is, being in the baseball realm, I get pitched vision training stuff all the time. And there's no shortage of awesome technology out there, VR goggles, and the latest things that you can do with touch screens. Could I also do something using a Brock string and a Snellen chart? Because that's exactly what we do. It costs $10 and it's really easy to implement. So those are just different alternatives. And there's not necessarily one better than others. It's sometimes you just have to be creative with what you're doing. And I always say communication because, verbal skills and talking to your athletes, talking to your coaches, that's the absolute best way to get the information that you really need. Another point that most people don't really like to address when this is, are we doing what we're doing for me or for the athlete? A lot of times as coaches, we're always trying to make, do things better than we used to. We learn, we get better. So sometimes our programming changes and evolves, which is absolutely fantastic and it should. But sometimes we get doing some really advanced things that we really need to think about. Our athletes may not need. Because sometimes as much as we like to think our athletes are absolute world-class athletes, and, as Chris alluded to, we had 5 people drafted in the top 5, and we did have the #1 overall this year. But at the same time, when they came in as a freshman, they were still freshmen. So they're absolutely gifted and world-class in the skill that they do on the field. But from a training perspective, they need some very simple training. So sometimes I think we have to check ourselves with our programming and the technology that we're trying to do from an advanced perspective, and sometimes take a step back and realize sometimes the training age that we have of our kids is, 0, 1, and 2, and we can do some very basic, simple things that are going to work. And I put recruiting in there because I'm not naive to the fact that sometimes some of the technology and assessments and training that we do does lend itself to the recruiting race that I talked about with the new school. So I get it. There has to be a little bit of a balance in there. but we also have, a role in our field when we're talking to our administrators and our coaches, when sometimes they're trying to push the envelope of what we're doing. Sometimes we need to say, hey, we can't do that because that's going to spread ourselves too thin from doing the very basics that we need to be doing. And I say, why does this matter? And Virch, that one's for you. You got the old Ditka and the old football shorts right there, because he's about as old school as they come. And you look at some of those old coaches, and even now you have Belichick and Saban, and they've got all the money in the world, but sometimes doing things with the new school ways, I'm kind of portraying it in this light. Sometimes you can't address those intangible qualities that you can really develop when you're in the weight room. Sometimes we use some of these assessments to assess, what's their readiness level. Sometimes their readiness level is going to be a little bit lower than we want, but it's attributed to what they're doing off the field. And so sometimes that's not really feeding into the discipline and the accountability that we need to ask of these kids to make sure they're doing all the right things off the field to show up and be ready to train. And we all talked about, adaptability with the SAID principle. And really, for me, the big thing is learning how to deal with adversity. You need to be able to push your athletes outside of their comfort zone. And there's a time and a place for it. So I'm not saying we have to go straight up old school. We're doing 3 days and puking after every single workout. But there is a certain component to pushing kids beyond what they think they are capable of. So they realize that they're capable of a lot more. Because I think that's the thing with kids, is they don't even realize, how deep their well goes. So that's a big part of the old school piece that I think we need to consider in pushing the adversity aspect. And that goes back to, we talk about the art of coaching all the time. There are some things that you just can't measure through, some sort of testing protocol. We also talk from a coach's, we talk about coach's eye in our assessments, but our gut instincts, our intuition from experience and feel, that's a major thing that you have to learn how to do. When you get kids coming in from practice, through discussion, you need to be able to figure out, hey, how are they actually feeling? Because I don't have some sort of assessment right then and there. And so you need to kind of hone that skill all the time. I think being simple and consistent is completely overrated. Consistency, I think, is one of the hardest things that we do in a weight room. And it's even from the coach's perspective, being consistent with our coaching and our cueing and not letting kids get away with bad form. The hardest thing to do is to tell a kid over and over and over again every single day is to get deeper. So I think a lot of times the consistency that we feel is hard to get to our athletes really stems from us. It's extremely hard to do. But when you're doing things consistently over time, that's what I call toughness. So when people talk about wanting to do toughness training, it doesn't come from the difficulty of the workout. It comes from the consistency of the coaching that you're doing and making sure they're upholding your standards and expectations. And when we're talking about expectations, I think that's the biggest thing that, I don't think we do a great job really holding kids day in, day out to the high level of expectations, and especially, during these quarantine times. I remember when it first happened, everybody got on calls and said, how do we think we're going to do things coming back? What's going to be our protocols? And while that had to happen, part of me was thinking, if we just set our expectations for the kids, we're going to be okay. If we set the expectations, so I told my guys when they come back, I understand that there's crazy things going on and you may not have the normal gym access that you do, but when you step back on campus, here's my level of expectations. I expect you to meet it. No excuses for what's going on in the world, because kids are creative. They're always going to find a way. So I have no doubt, because of the culture that we've created through the constant, consistency, standards, and expectations, that when they come back from campus, my kids are going to meet the expectations that they have. And if they don't, they're going to be on the shit list that they would normally have in any sort of normal year. And that's where tough loves comes into play. I know sometimes when I talk, it comes across a little bit harsh, but I absolutely love my kids and I want the absolute best for them. And at the end of the day, kids love discipline. They're always going to push you on trying to get away with things, but kids love structure and they love discipline. Sometimes when they're 18 to 22 years old, they just don't know it yet. And that's our job as educators, to make sure they understand why we're doing what we're doing. And I think our field is advancing better about explaining the why of what we're doing. And I think that's just something that needs to continue, because if we really educate our kids, that really goes a long way. So at the end of the day, you know, there are some people that go way more into technology and assessments than I do. I think the biggest thing is you have to find a balance, because both ends of the spectrum offer a lot. So if you find a balance, I think that's really what's going to help you. So just to give an idea of what we do for ASU baseball, we use Sparta Science for our force profiling. So we'll test on a force platform, you know, every 2 to 4 weeks. We do old school range of motion testing. So we use a digital inclinometer and a goniometer to measure, you know, shoulder and hip range of motion, and use that data to get corrective exercises that kids have to do on a daily and weekly basis. We use Gym Aware for feedback and intent. And then really we use, you know, all the coaches' eyes and communication to make sure we handle our daily adjustments. So I know sometimes I talk about, you know, it seems like I'm very anti, you know, new school with science and technology, but that's really not, that, you know, couldn't be further from the truth. We do use a whole lot of that. But I think, again, finding that balance is a big key in trying, you know, to create a successful culture and drive a program to, you know, the top that it can be. So with that, I thank you. If you have any questions, there's my information. I have my Twitter handle on there. I'm bad at social media. I don't post much. So really, if you want to get a hold of me, please email me, my cell phone, text me, call me, and I'd be more than happy to share absolutely anything with you.
Thank you, Jason. That's awesome. I know that so many of us can relate to that topic in particular, and who is on this call in so many ways. One of my favorite things you said was real toughness is being able to do things consistently. And I think that's one of the bottom lines that really hits home with me in terms of how do we move forward from all of this. And just to echo everyone that has been on this call and has talked about you, we miss you dearly, Jason, and we love watching you virtue do big things down at Arizona State. But so appreciate you coming on and for what you had